My husband stood up during our Sunday family dinner, clinked his crystal wine glass, and proudly announced that he was giving our $2.4 million mansion to his sister. Then he handed me a piece of paper, told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and leave, and said his divorce lawyer would call me in the morning. He wore a smug smile on his face. What he didn't know was that the fraudulent document in his hand was about to send him straight to federal prison and leave his entire family completely ruined. My name is Ori. I'm 33 years old and work as a corporate restructuring consultant. I spend my days analyzing financial disasters, liquidating toxic assets, and legally dismantling fraudulent companies. I'm trained to spot a bad investment from a mile away, yet somehow I overlooked the biggest liability of all, sitting right across from me at my own dining table. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in Calabasas, California. The sunset poured golden light across the marble countertops in my custom kitchen and illuminated the expensive artwork I had carefully selected for my home. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking a prime rib roast for my husband Derek and his family. Derek is 35 and works as a mid-level manager at a boutique insurance brokerage. He always liked to play the role of the great provider, even though his salary barely covered the maintenance costs of the house we lived in. Seated around my custom oak dining table were Derek, his mother Barbara, his younger sister Megan, and Megan's husband Devin. Devin is a 34-year-old smooth-talking black tech entrepreneur who is always pitching some revolutionary new app that never actually launches. I had just served the last of an expensive Cabernet when Derek abruptly stood up, grabbed his silver fork, and aggressively tapped it against his wine glass. The sharp clinking cut through the soft jazz music playing in the background. I smiled genuinely, thinking he was about to make a heartfelt toast for his sister's recent wedding anniversary. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick folded manila envelope. He tossed it onto the center of the table right beside the expensive floral centerpiece. Derek looked at Megan and Devin with a sickeningly proud smile. "Happy anniversary, you two," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance and undeserved confidence. "I know you've been looking for a proper place to settle down and build Devin's startup headquarters, so I've decided to give you this house. The quitclaim deed is right there in the envelope. I signed it this afternoon. It's all yours." The table fell completely silent for a fraction of a second before Megan squealed with delight and practically lunged across the chairs to hug her brother. I sat there completely frozen, my fingers tightly gripping the stem of my wine glass, trying to process the absolute absurdity of what had just come out of his mouth. Then Derek turned his cold, emotionless eyes toward me. The loving husband I had woken up beside that morning was completely gone. In his place stood a stranger drunk on his own perceived power and fueled by his family's greed. "Ori," he said in a flat, robotic, completely dismissive tone, "this marriage clearly isn't working anymore. I'm giving this house to my family because they actually need it. You have 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave my property. My lawyer will send over the divorce papers first thing tomorrow morning. Don't try to make a scene or drag this out in court. It'll only make things harder for you." Before continuing with this story, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to watch someone you loved reveal their true toxic colors in the blink of an eye. You'll definitely want to hear how I handled the sheer audacity of this man and his greedy family. Slowly, I looked around the dining table, studying their reactions. My mother-in-law Barbara wasn't shocked or horrified by her son's cruel behavior. She was grinning from ear to ear, practically vibrating with excitement. Devin was already leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine and looking around the vaulted ceiling living room as if he were the new king of the castle. Clearly, this was not a spontaneous decision made in the heat of the moment. It was a highly calculated and premeditated ambush orchestrated by his entire family to strip me of everything I owned. They had planned this dinner specifically to humiliate me and throw me out onto the street. But as I stared at the manila envelope resting on the table, my initial shock quickly transformed into cold, calculated anger. Derek had made a monumental and fatal miscalculation. Before I could even open my mouth to respond to Derek, Devin leaned forward and rested his elbows on my custom dining table. He flashed a bright, completely undeserved smile. He had that polished Silicon Valley aesthetic that masked a complete lack of real business intelligence. He adjusted his expensive designer glasses, the same pair I knew Derek had charged to his credit card last Christmas, and let out a condescending laugh. "Let's be realistic for a second, Audrey," Devin said, his voice smooth but dripping with disrespect. "You're a corporate consultant. You review spreadsheets for a living. Sure, you make good money, but not mansion in Calabasas money. Maintaining a 5-bedroom house for a woman who works 70 hours a week is just a massive misallocation of resources. Honestly, it's practically a tragedy. You're barely even here to enjoy the square footage." I stared at him with a completely blank expression. The audacity of this man was almost impressive. Over the last 6 years, Devin had launched and subsequently sunk no fewer than 5 different companies. First, there was the cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed within 3 months. Then came the custom sneaker app that never made it past beta testing. After that came a dropshipping business that ended with a warehouse full of defective electronics and a massive lawsuit. Every single time, he somehow managed to fail upward, mainly because he knew exactly how to flatter my husband's fragile ego. Devin took a slow sip of his wine, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "Meanwhile, my new tech startup is about to secure a series of funding," he continued, gesturing vaguely through the air as though painting a picture of his imaginary empire. "We're building an AI-powered logistics platform. It's going to revolutionize the supply chain industry. But to attract top-tier developers and venture capitalists, we need a proper headquarters. We can't keep operating out of our cramped 2-bedroom apartment. This house is perfect. The vaulted ceilings in your living room will make an incredible open-concept workspace. We'll rip out those ridiculous silk curtains and bring in standing desks." Megan nodded enthusiastically, reaching over to squeeze Devin's hand. "And the master suite will be perfect for us when we finally decide to start a family," she added while deliberately looking at me. "A house like this needs life, Audrey. It needs children, energy, and innovation. Not just one lonely woman hoarding space she doesn't even own." I slowly looked from Megan to Devin and then back to Derek. Derek was puffing out his chest, clearly enjoying his role as the benevolent patriarch single-handedly funding the next great tech unicorn. Derek had always wanted to be seen as an angel investor, a visionary who spotted talent and nurtured it. He earned $60,000 a year selling insurance policies, but in his mind, giving away my property somehow transformed him into Elon Musk. Devin smirked confidently and leaned back with his arms crossed over his chest. "I appreciate you being so understanding about this transition, Audrey," he said, even though I hadn't agreed to anything. "Derek here is a real brother. He recognizes a unicorn when he sees one. Once we go public, we'll make sure Derek gets a massive return on his investment. We keep everything in the family. That's how generational wealth is built." Generational wealth. The phrase echoed in my head, and I physically had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from bursting out laughing. Devin was sitting at my table, drinking the wine I paid for, eating the food I cooked, inside the house I purchased, while lecturing me about generational wealth. He was manipulating Derek so flawlessly that Derek genuinely believed giving away a multi-million-dollar asset was a brilliant business move. "You really have everything figured out, don't you, Devin?" I said quietly, keeping my voice dangerously calm. a new headquarters, an open concept workspace, series of funding. It all sounds incredibly ambitious. Devin beamed, mistaking my icy composure for admiration. That's the tech mindset, Audrey. You have to pivot when the market demands it. Consider this your pivot. You'll find a nice, practical condo downtown, closer to your office. It'll be much better for your commute. He picked up the manila envelope containing the quitclaim deed and tapped it playfully against the table. Derek did the right thing here. He stepped up for his family. You should respect that and just bow gracefully. I simply nodded. I didn't scream. I just watched them celebrate a victory they hadn't actually won yet. Barbara, who had been dabbing at her eyes with a lace napkin, suddenly reached across the table and grabbed Megan's hand. She let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings. "Oh, Derek," she cried, looking at her son as though he were a saint. "You've always had the biggest heart. You're my golden boy. Always taking care of your little sister, always putting family first." Barbara was 60 years old and had spent the last decade living off the monthly allowance I secretly provided to Derek so he could give it to her. She valued appearances above everything else, wearing fake designer jewelry while lecturing me about being a traditional wife. Now she felt empowered enough to drop all pretenses. Barbara released Megan's hand and turned her cold gaze toward me. Her fake tears disappeared instantly, replaced by a calculating stare. "Don't make that sour face, Audrey," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "This is exactly what needs to happen. You and Derek have been married for 5 years, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. Not a single child. You're 33 years old and obsessed with your career. You have completely failed in your duties to this family." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. She knew exactly how much we had struggled with fertility issues before I realized Derek was the problem. He had refused to see a doctor, blaming my demanding corporate job instead. Now Barbara was weaponizing that deeply personal pain against me in front of everyone. "A huge 5-bedroom mansion is meant for raising a family," Barbara continued, waving her hand dismissively around the room. "Megan and Devin are the future of this family. They're the ones who will give me grandchildren. They need the space and the stability. What do you need it for? Sitting alone in your home office staring at financial spreadsheets? It's selfish, Audrey. Pure selfishness." I inhaled slowly and deliberately. "So," I said in a dangerously steady voice, "this was a group decision. All of you sat down together and decided how to divide up my property behind my back." Barbara scoffed and leaned back in her chair with a look of absolute triumph. "Your property? Please. When you marry into a family, you share. And since you clearly can't grasp the basic concept of sharing, I took the liberty of speeding up the moving process." She took a delicate sip of wine. "I hired a moving company this morning while you were out buying the roast. They were very efficient. They packed all your designer clothes, those ridiculously expensive shoes you waste money on, and your office files into cheap cardboard boxes. They're sitting in the damp basement right now. I figured you'd want a head start on your 24-hour eviction notice." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the air. This wasn't just Derek having some manic episode of sudden generosity. It was a highly orchestrated and premeditated conspiracy. My own mother-in-law had allowed complete strangers into my home to dig through my personal belongings. They had violated my privacy, handled my expensive wardrobe and confidential corporate documents, and thrown them into boxes like garbage. They had been planning this ruthless takeover for weeks, waiting for the perfect Sunday dinner to spring the trap. Derek looked at his mother with a proud smile. "Mom handled the logistics," he said casually. "We wanted the transition to be as smooth as possible for Devin and Megan. Honestly, you should thank her, Audrey. She saved you a lot of heavy lifting." Devin laughed while tapping on his phone screen. "Yeah, we already have contractors coming tomorrow morning to measure the living room for the startup standing desks. So you'll need to be out by 9 a.m., Audrey. We can't have you getting in the construction crew's way. They were vultures circling what they thought was a corpse, ready to tear my life apart piece by piece. Barbara stared at me, expecting me to break down. She wanted me to cry, to beg Derek for forgiveness, to plead to stay in the house I had paid for. But I refused to give them that satisfaction. I looked at the smug faces of my husband, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and her husband. They were completely convinced they had outsmarted a woman who dismantled multi-million-dollar fraudulent corporations before breakfast. I gave one final glance to the crystal wine glass in my hand. Then I gently set it down on the custom oak table. The soft clink of crystal against wood was the only sound in the room. I didn't cry. I didn't fall to my knees begging my husband to reconsider. I didn't scream at my mother-in-law or throw my plate at Devin. In my line of work, when a hostile corporate takeover begins, emotional outbursts only give your opponent the advantage they desperately need. Instead, I slowly stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my silk dress, and locked my eyes directly onto Derek. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty behind his arrogant facade. He had expected a hysterical wife. He had expected a woman who would negotiate and beg, someone he could easily dominate and humiliate in front of his family to prove his authority. But I was not that woman. I walked around the edge of the dining table, my heels clicking sharply against the imported hardwood floor until I stood only a few feet away from him. "Are you absolutely sure you want to play this hand, Derek?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but heavy enough to cut through the tension in the room. "Because once you put these cards on the table, there's no taking them back. You are making a decision that will alter the rest of your life." Derek scoffed, crossed his arms, and puffed out his chest to appear bigger in front of his audience. "Don't try to psychoanalyze me, Audrey. It's over. You spent the last 5 years making me feel like a guest in my own marriage. You controlled the finances, made every decision, and constantly emasculated me with your massive paychecks. Well, I'm taking my power back." He pointed toward the envelope. "Half of everything we acquired during this marriage belongs to me under California law. I choose to give my half of this house to my sister. The other half will be settled in divorce court. So stop acting like you have all the leverage here. You have nothing." His complete ignorance of basic property law was astonishing. He genuinely believed that simply because we were legally married, he automatically owned half of a property I had purchased entirely with a premarital trust fund. But I wasn't about to give him free legal advice. Megan sneered from across the table. "Just leave, Audrey. You're making this uncomfortable for everyone. We want to celebrate our anniversary in peace." Megan waved her hand dismissively. "Devin already called you an Uber. It's waiting at the end of the driveway." Devin lifted his wine glass in a mocking toast. "And don't worry about the boxes in the basement. I'll have the movers take them to a storage unit tomorrow. I'll even pay the first month's rent for you. Consider it an act of charity from your new homeowner." Barbara let out a sharp, unpleasant laugh. "Just make sure you leave the keys on the kitchen counter, Audrey. We're changing the locks tomorrow morning anyway, but we don't need you trying to sneak back in and steal something." I didn't respond to Barbara. I didn't look at Megan or Devin. My attention stayed completely fixed on Derek. He looked unbelievably proud of himself, utterly convinced he had just delivered a masterstroke. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won. I turned around and walked toward the grand foyer. I picked up my designer handbag from the console table and slipped my phone into the pocket. I didn't bother going downstairs to look at the cheap cardboard boxes they had carelessly stuffed my belongings into. I didn't need to. I knew perfectly well that I would be back before they even had the chance to move a single piece of my furniture. I opened the heavy mahogany front door. The cool night air from the Calabasas Hills swept into the foyer, carrying the familiar scent of pine and eucalyptus. Before stepping out onto the driveway, I paused. I slightly turned my head toward the brightly lit dining room. They were already pouring more wine, laughing loudly, celebrating their stolen victory. Derek was patting Devon on the back while Barbara cheerfully pointed at the expensive silk curtains she planned to rip down. "Derek," I called out, my voice echoing lightly through the massive foyer. He stopped laughing and looked at me, the smug smile still plastered across his face. I gave him one final chilling smile. "Enjoy your last night." Then I stepped into the darkness and closed the door behind me with a loud, decisive click. The game had officially begun. I walked down the illuminated driveway toward my car, the cool California night air clearing the suffocating atmosphere of the dinner from my lungs. I got into my car, the soft leather seat a stark contrast to the cold reality of what had just happened. I drove to Los Angeles in complete silence. Women in my position were supposed to be sobbing over the steering wheel, mourning the sudden death of their marriage. But my eyes were completely dry. I wasn't grieving. I was calculating. 20 minutes later, I handed my keys to the valet at the Ritz-Carlton. I walked through the grand lobby with perfect posture and booked the finest executive suite available. Once the bellhop set down my suitcase and closed the heavy mahogany door behind him, silence returned. I removed my heels, placed them neatly beside the closet, and walked straight to the desk in the corner of the suite. I didn't take a hot bath. I didn't order wine to calm my nerves. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened it. In the world of corporate restructuring, when someone attempts a hostile takeover, the very first step is always to cut off the opposing side's funding. You freeze their assets, cut their supply lines, and deprive them of the resources they need to fight back. Derek and his family had just launched a hostile takeover of my life. And Derek's entire existence, his inflated ego, his generous Big Brother act, was completely financed by my capital. I logged into my primary wealth management portal and stared at the dashboard. It was time to confront the financial reality I had spent 5 years politely ignoring in order to protect my husband's fragile masculinity. I earn $400,000 a year. My consulting firm pays me generously to travel around the country rescuing bankrupt companies. Derek, on the other hand, earns $60,000 a year selling mid-level insurance policies. It's a perfectly respectable income for a single man living within his means. But Derek never lived within his means. Derek drove a leased luxury vehicle, wore an expensive watch, and took his family to high-end steakhouses. He loved playing the role of the wealthy provider who spoiled his sister and subsidized his mother's lifestyle. He couldn't actually afford any of it. I allowed him to. When I realized the enormous income gap was making him insecure, I made the mistake of trying to fix it with my checkbook. I gave him 3 supplementary platinum credit cards and told him to treat them as shared funds. It was an illusion I maintained out of love. I clicked on the first account, his primary platinum card used for daily expenses and dinners. The screen loaded his recent transactions. A $200 charge at a golf club. A $400 charge at a boutique where he had purchased Meghan an anniversary gift. My money buying their loyalty. I hovered my cursor over the security tab. I clicked the drop-down menu and selected the option to report the card as lost. Then I permanently removed the authorized user. The account froze instantly. I moved to the second card. This was the travel and entertainment card, the one he used to book flights for Devon and Meghan whenever they wanted weekend getaways. I froze that one too. Finally, I opened the third account. This was the card he used to pay his mother's monthly bills, shopping sprees, and little luxuries. It was the financial lifeline that kept Barbara fiercely loyal to him and deeply resentful toward me. With one sharp click of my trackpad, I cut that lifeline completely. I leaned back and watched the confirmation emails flood into my inbox. Card frozen. Account restricted. Access denied. In less than 10 minutes, I had systematically dismantled the financial foundation Derek had built his entire identity upon. He practically had no cash in his checking account because he always spent his paycheck on tailored suits and golf memberships. He depended on my platinum cards for everything. Now he was effectively broke. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Derek had thrown me out of my own house thinking he had won the war. He had no idea I had just cut off his oxygen supply. I walked over to the king-size bed, pulled back the pristine sheets, and switched off the bedside lamp. I knew exactly what was going to happen when the sun came up, and I wanted to be fully rested for the show. The next morning, I woke up at exactly 7 o'clock. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite, casting a warm glow across the immaculate white sheets. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't have to wake up and immediately manage Derek's chaotic schedule. I didn't have to remind him to pick up his dry cleaning or listen to him complain about his mediocre job. I simply picked up the hotel phone, ordered a spinach and feta omelet with black coffee, and stepped into the marble bathroom for a long, luxurious shower. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy burden of subsidizing the fragile ego of an ungrateful man had finally been lifted from my shoulders. By 8:30, I was sitting at the glass dining table in my suite wearing a plush white robe and reviewing a quarterly earnings report for one of my corporate clients. My phone had remained completely silent all morning. I knew Derek's morning routine by heart. He always woke up late, played the hero by offering to grab breakfast for everyone, and drove down to the absurdly expensive artisan bakery at the end of our street. He loved going there because the baristas knew him by name and treated him like a VIP entirely because he tipped 20% using my platinum credit card. At exactly 8:45, my phone screen finally lit up. Caller ID, Derek. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of hot coffee before calmly answering. I didn't say hello. I simply held the phone to my ear and waited. Audrey, what the hell did you do? Derek shouted into the receiver. His voice sounded completely frantic, echoing slightly as though he were pacing back and forth on the concrete sidewalk. I'm standing inside the bakery right now. Devin and Megan ordered 4 specialty lattes and a dozen artisan pastries. The total was almost $80. I handed the cashier my card, the one I always use, and the machine declined it. It beeped loudly in front of a huge line of people. The barista looked at me like I was some kind of criminal and told me the account was blocked. I smiled while keeping my eyes fixed on the financial spreadsheet open on my laptop screen. Is there a problem, Derek? I asked softly, my voice perfectly calm. Yes, there's a huge problem, he yelled, his panic rapidly escalating. My mother is sitting by the window watching me. Devin is standing right behind me waiting for his iced matcha latte. I tried using the backup travel card you gave me and that one got declined too. You canceled my cards. You actually froze my accounts out of spite just because I gave the house to my sister. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet, amused laugh. Your accounts, Derek? Let's clarify something right now. Those are my accounts. They're attached to my credit score, paid for by my corporate salary, and issued under my primary authorization. You are merely an authorized user. And since you made it very clear last night that our marriage is over and that you are the big, powerful man of the house, I assumed you no longer needed your wife financing your luxury lifestyle. You can't do this to me right now, Derek hissed, lowering his voice into a frantic whisper. Clearly, he was trying to hide his humiliation from his family and the wealthy local customers standing in line behind him. Audrey, please turn the cards back on. Just for today. I'll pay you back when the divorce is finalized. I can't stand here and tell Devin I can't afford to buy breakfast. He thinks I'm an angel investor. You're embarrassing me in front of my family. You embarrassed yourself, Derek, I replied coldly, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had tried to make me homeless less than 12 hours earlier. You wanted to play the role of the wealthy patriarch? You wanted to build generational wealth and fund tech startups? You literally threw me out of my own house to prove how generous you are. So be generous. Pull out your own debit card and pay for your own coffee. Audrey, please, he begged. The arrogant tone from the night before had completely vanished. I don't have any money in my checking account until Friday. You know that. Then I suggest you ask your brilliant tech entrepreneur brother-in-law to cover the bill, I said softly. Enjoy your breakfast, Derek. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. Then I tossed the phone onto the table and returned to eating my omelet. The first domino had officially fallen, and the sound of it crashing was absolute music to my ears. I finished the last bite of my spinach and feta omelet, savoring the quiet peace of my hotel room. Down in the city, I knew Derek was scrambling, probably begging Devin to cover the cost of his overpriced pastries while trying to explain his suddenly frozen funds. But my brief moment of amusement was over. It was time for war. And in my line of work, you do not go to war without your lead attorney. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Jonathan. Jonathan was 50 years old, a senior partner at one of the most ruthless law firms in Los Angeles. He specialized in high-net-worth divorces and complex real estate litigation. We had crossed paths professionally on several corporate restructuring cases, and I knew firsthand that he was an absolute shark in a courtroom. He didn't possess a single ounce of empathy for opposing counsel, which made him exactly the man I needed today. I pressed call, and he answered on the second ring. Audrey, my favorite corporate assassin, Jonathan greeted, his voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. To what do I owe the pleasure on a Monday morning? I hope you're bringing me a lucrative corporate dissolution. Better, I replied, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window and staring out at the sprawling Los Angeles skyline. I'm bringing you a very entertaining divorce. Mine. I need you to file immediately, and I need to execute a hostile eviction on my Calabasas property. Jonathan laughed deeply. Derek finally did something incredibly stupid, I assume. Tell me everything. I gave him a concise, emotionless summary of the Sunday dinner ambush. I detailed how Derek stood up, presented a manila envelope, and announced he was gifting the $2.4 million mansion to his sister Megan and her husband Devin. I told Jonathan about the 24-hour eviction notice Derek had so generously issued me and how my mother-in-law had already packed my clothes into cheap cardboard boxes in the basement. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by sudden booming laughter. Jonathan laughed so hard he actually had to catch his breath. Audrey, please tell me you're joking, he finally said. That idiot really handed over a quitclaim deed? He did, I confirmed, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. He told me that under California law he owns half our marital assets and chooses to give his half of the house to his sister. That is the single most spectacular display of financial illiteracy I've heard all year, Jonathan declared, his tone shifting from amused to purely predatory. Let's review the facts for my own sanity. You purchased that Calabasas mansion entirely in cash using the inheritance from your late father. Correct, I answered. I bought it 2 years before I met Derek. And under California law, Jonathan continued while pacing through his office. I could hear his leather shoes creaking across the hardwood floor. Property acquired before marriage remains separate property as long as it is not commingled with marital funds. Derek has never paid a single cent toward the property taxes, maintenance, or insurance. His salary barely covers his golf hobby. I paid for the golf hobby too, I corrected him. But I froze all those cards this morning. Brilliant, Jonathan said. But here's the best part. The final killing blow. You didn't just buy that house in your own name. We created an irrevocable trust. The mansion is completely locked inside that trust. Derek's name has never been on the title, never on the deed. He has zero legal claim to it. Not even 1%. You cannot sign away an asset you do not own. Legally, it's the equivalent of me trying to sell the Brooklyn Bridge to a tourist. I know, I said, pressing my forehead lightly against the cold window glass. Derek simply assumed that because we exchanged vows and he lived there, he magically owned half my net worth. Devin convinced him giving away the house was some brilliant move to build generational wealth. Well, Devin is about to learn a very painful lesson in real estate law, Jonathan replied, his voice turning deadly serious. But Audrey, this raises a massive red flag. A quitclaim deed has to be filed with the county clerk to be processed. If Derek actually filed documents attempting to transfer property he does not own, then this wasn't just a stupid mistake. We need to see exactly what he signed. Give me 20 minutes to pull the county records online. I have a feeling your husband just handed us something far worse than a divorce. I hung up and walked toward the Sweets coffee machine. I poured myself another cup, watching steam rise against the backdrop of the busy Los Angeles streets below. 20 minutes can feel like an eternity when you're waiting for the final puzzle piece that will permanently destroy your marriage. I used the time efficiently. I brushed my teeth, applied sharp, flawless makeup, and changed into a tailored navy blue suit. If today was going to be a war, I intended to dress like a general. I slid my laptop into my leather briefcase and sat back down at the glass dining table, staring at my phone. Exactly 22 minutes later, the screen lit up with Jonathan's name. I answered immediately. This time he didn't bother with a casual greeting. I could hear the aggressive clicking of his computer mouse in the background. Audrey, he said, his voice stripped completely of the amusement he had earlier. It had been replaced by the cold surgical tone he only used when he was looking at a guaranteed criminal case. I found the filing. I pulled the records directly from the county database. I'm listening, I said, leaning forward with my elbows on the table. Jonathan took a deep breath. Derek filed a quitclaim deed with the county recorder's office Friday afternoon right before closing for the weekend. He filed it electronically using a third-party digital notary service. The document attempts to transfer the title of the Calabasas mansion from the irrevocable trust into a newly formed limited liability company. He paused briefly. I ran a quick search through the state business registry. The LLC was formed exactly 3 weeks ago, and the sole registered agent is your tech entrepreneur brother-in-law, Devin. My jaw tightened. They weren't just trying to take the house so Megan could have a beautiful kitchen. Devin was actively trying to hide my $2.4 million asset inside a corporate entity he controlled. But that's not even the worst part, Audrey, Jonathan continued, lowering his voice. I'm looking at the final page of the digital document right now. There's a verified electronic signature authorizing the full transfer of ownership. The system recorded the IP address and timestamp. It's your exact digital signature. The temperature in my hotel room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. I went completely still, my mind instantly racing back to Friday afternoon. I had been sitting inside a glass-walled conference room in downtown Los Angeles for 9 straight hours negotiating the details of a complex corporate merger for a client. I hadn't opened a single personal email. I most certainly did not sign away the most valuable financial asset I own. Jonathan, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice, I did not sign that document. I never authorized a digital notary. Derek forged my signature. I know you didn't, Jonathan replied instantly, ruthless satisfaction returning to his tone. And do you know why I know you didn't? Because your future ex-husband just crossed the line from being a greedy, delusional idiot into becoming a documented federal criminal. He paused briefly. Let me break this down so you understand the exact weapon he just handed us. By forging your signature on a legal property transfer document, Derek committed document forgery, which is a felony. That alone is enough to ruin his life. Jonathan paused long enough for the weight of the word felony to settle in before continuing. But it gets much worse for him. Because he used an online internet portal to transmit a fraudulent real estate deed using servers that cross state lines, he also committed wire fraud. Wire fraud is a federal offense. It carries massive prison exposure, and because the value of the stolen asset exceeds $2 million, this is not some minor clerical issue. This is high-level white-collar felony fraud. His voice sharpened. He didn't just make a stupid mistake trying to impress his sister. He committed a major crime with mandatory sentencing exposure. I gripped the edge of the glass table tightly. Derek's blind arrogance had finally caught up with him. He had been so desperate to play the role of the wealthy, generous patriarch for Devin and Megan that he had literally forged my name on a government document without doing even a single second of legal research. He thought he was untouchable simply because he was my husband. How did he even get my digital signature? I asked, my mind rapidly piecing everything together. He lives with you, Audrey, Jonathan pointed out logically. He has access to your home office. He probably waited until you were asleep, opened your personal laptop or iPad, guessed your password, and approved the document himself. It's incredibly stupid and incredibly traceable. But arrogant men usually are. He exhaled softly. What matters now is that we have the ultimate advantage. What's our next move? I asked, feeling a massive rush of pure adrenaline surge through me. Let him keep digging the hole deeper, Jonathan replied calmly. We need more evidence showing intent to commit fraud. I'm putting my private investigator on Devin immediately. I agreed. After hanging up, I closed my laptop. My adrenaline was running high, but I knew I needed to remain patient. In corporate litigation, you never interrupt your enemy while they are actively making catastrophic mistakes. I decided to work from the hotel suite for the rest of the day, setting up a temporary command center at the glass desk overlooking the city. I had just started reviewing another quarterly earnings report when my phone buzzed aggressively across the table. It wasn't Derek calling to beg about the credit cards. This time it was a text message from his sister Megan. I unlocked my phone and opened the thread. For high-resolution photos immediately loaded onto my screen. My heart gave one slow, heavy beat as I realized exactly what I was looking at. It was my formal dining room. But it no longer looked like my elegant dining room. Megan and Devin were standing in the center of the room holding heavy metal paint scrapers. The expensive hardwood floors were completely covered with shredded strips of my custom hand-painted Italian silk wallpaper. I had commissioned that wallpaper directly from a boutique design studio in Milan 2 years earlier. It had cost me $8,000, and a specialist had spent 3 full weeks installing it by hand. In the photos, Megan was smiling brightly at the camera, wearing dirty denim overalls while holding a huge torn piece of the delicate silk like a hunting trophy. Devin stood in the background, actively scraping into the drywall beneath it, completely destroying the smooth plaster underneath. Another text message immediately appeared beneath the photos. Good morning, Audrey. Just thought we'd give you a little renovation update. We decided to start early fixing your terrible decorating taste. That ugly wallpaper made the room feel too closed off and suffocating for a modern tech startup. Don't worry, we're painting everything a bright startup white. Hope you're enjoying your new apartment wherever that is. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of that message, another one arrived. Derek says we can rip out the custom kitchen island tomorrow. Devin needs more open space for a ping-pong table to encourage relaxed corporate culture for his new software engineers. I can't believe you lived in such a dark, depressing space for so long. The house is finally going to have good energy now that it's ours. My fingers tightened around the edges of my phone. Their entitlement was suffocating. Megan had been inside my home for less than 12 hours and was already aggressively destroying a masterpiece I had paid for with my own hard-earned money. And Derek was clearly standing there watching them destroy my property, allowing their chaotic behavior because he was too cowardly to stop them. He was so desperate for their approval that he was letting them dismantle my home piece by piece. A normal person would have immediately called the police to report vandalism. A devastated wife would have called her husband screaming and crying over the destruction of their shared sanctuary. But I was neither of those things. I took a slow breath to steady myself and studied the photos again. Not as a homeowner mourning damaged walls, but as a forensic accountant documenting an active crime scene. Every strip of silk wallpaper falling onto the floor represented another $1,000 in property damage. Under California law, malicious destruction of property exceeding $400 legally qualifies as felony vandalism. They were literally sending me photographic evidence of themselves committing another felony, completely unaware of the legal trap they were walking into. I did not respond to their mocking messages. Engaging with arrogant narcissists only gives them the emotional validation they desperately crave. Instead, I carefully took screenshots of every single image Megan had sent me. I made sure the timestamps and her phone number were clearly visible. I captured screenshots of the text messages admitting to the destruction and directly referencing Derek's approval. Then I uploaded the entire batch into an encrypted cloud folder shared with my attorney. I quickly drafted an email to Jonathan. Subject: Additional criminal charges. Jonathan, please review the newly uploaded files. Megan and Devin are currently destroying approximately $18,000 worth of custom Italian wallpaper inside the dining room. Please add felony vandalism and intentional destruction of private property to our growing list of charges. Let me know when the private investigator reports back on Devin. I pressed send and placed my phone face down on the glass desk. They thought they were erasing my presence from the house. They thought they were stamping their authority onto the walls. In reality, they were simply tightening the legal noose around their own necks. I reopened my client spreadsheet completely unfazed and returned to work. I still had a multi-million-dollar corporate merger to finalize, and I was not about to let my husband's delusional family interfere with my billable hours. It was shortly after noon when my laptop chimed with an urgent calendar invitation from Jonathan. The subject line simply read, "Join the video conference immediately." I clicked the secure link. Jonathan appeared on my screen. He did not look like a lawyer casually reviewing a divorce file. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "Audrey, open your web browser and go to Instagram right now," Jonathan instructed, his voice tight with anticipation. "Don't use your personal account. Use a burner account or watch anonymously through the web viewer. Your brilliant entrepreneur brother-in-law is currently broadcasting his crimes to the entire internet in high definition." I immediately opened a new tab, navigated to Instagram, and searched for Devin's public profile. Sure enough, there was a bright red ring around his profile picture indicating he was live streaming. I clicked. The video loaded instantly. Devin was standing inside the grand foyer of my Calabasas mansion. He was wearing a dark gray fleece vest over a perfectly crisp white dress shirt, fully embracing the stereotypical Silicon Valley executive aesthetic. He held his phone high, smiling broadly at the camera while the viewer count steadily climbed. "What's up, guys?" Devin announced loudly to his audience, his voice echoing across my marble floors. "I told you big things were coming this quarter, and I always deliver. Welcome to the official new headquarters of our logistics platform." I watched in disbelief as Devin turned the camera to show the massive double staircase and the custom crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. That chandelier alone cost more than his yearly income. Jonathan spoke through my computer speakers. "I'm recording the entire stream on my side. Audrey, keep your volume up. We need every word. Devin walked down the hallway and pointed the camera toward the formal dining room where he and Megan had just destroyed my silk wallpaper. As you can see, we're already doing aggressive demolition, Devin bragged while panning across the ruined walls. We finalized acquisition of this $2.4 million property this morning. We're tearing down these outdated walls to build an open collaborative workspace for our core developers. A sharp wave of anger surged through me, but I forced myself to remain analytical. He wasn't simply bragging to friends. He was directly speaking to people he viewed as potential investors. We secured this major asset under our corporate LLC, Devin continued smoothly. This property gives us serious leverage. It proves to our venture capital partners that we're no longer operating out of a garage. We now control prime real estate in one of the most exclusive zip codes in California. He grinned confidently into the camera. For everyone who got in during the seed round, your equity just skyrocketed. And for those of you waiting to write a check, our company valuation just tripled. The time to invest is now. Jonathan let out a sharp, victorious laugh through the call. Oh, this is beautiful, he said, his eyes practically gleaming. He is actively soliciting financial investments while falsely claiming ownership of a multi-million-dollar asset he does not legally own. Is that securities fraud? I asked while keeping my eyes fixed on the stream as Devin casually leaned against my custom marble kitchen island. It is textbook securities fraud, Jonathan confirmed. And because he's doing it through an internet live stream to solicit funds, it's another count of wire fraud. He is building a massive federal case against himself in real time. He's literally creating the exact promotional material the Securities and Exchange Commission will use to send him to federal prison. I watched Devin confidently slap the marble countertop. We're taking this company to the moon, guys, he told his viewers with a charismatic smile. My brother-in-law Derek is actually our lead angel investor who helped negotiate this massive real estate acquisition. We keep wealth in the family. Only big moves from here. Drop a fire emoji in the chat if you're ready to disrupt the market with us. Tiny fire emojis floated up the side of the screen. Devin was so completely consumed by his own delusion that he had just publicly implicated Derek as an accomplice in his fraudulent corporate acquisition scheme. Fast money lenders move quickly, Jonathan continued, his tone sharp and methodical, but they still require a physical appraisal of the property before wiring out funds. I immediately understood where he was going. They already scheduled one, didn't they? I asked quietly. Jonathan gave a slow, satisfied nod. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I found the appointment confirmation inside Devin's email metadata. He used the same password across multiple business accounts like a complete amateur. A private appraisal firm from Orange County is coming to inspect the property for a hard money lender. I stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles. Below me, traffic moved through the city in smooth rivers of silver and red. Up here, everything felt strangely calm. They're already that desperate, I murmured. Oh, they're beyond desperate, Jonathan replied. Devin needs liquid cash immediately. Once the IRS lien fully activates, his accounts are getting frozen. He's trying to use your house as emergency collateral before federal collections lock him out of the financial system. I crossed my arms slowly. And Derek. Jonathan actually laughed. Derek thinks he's helping launch a tech empire. Meanwhile, his brilliant brother-in-law is using him as disposable insulation between himself and federal investigators. That hit with brutal accuracy. Derek had spent years trying to feel powerful, trying to feel important, trying to feel like the successful, wealthy men he envied. And Devin had weaponized every single insecurity perfectly. He really believed he was becoming an angel investor, I said quietly. He became an accomplice instead, Jonathan corrected coldly. Silence settled briefly between us. Then Jonathan's expression hardened further. Audrey, listen carefully to me. What happens next is important. We do not interfere tonight. We do not warn them. We do not contact the lender. You want them to continue, I realized. I want them fully committed, he replied instantly. Right now they still have room to claim ignorance or confusion. The second they knowingly present forged ownership documents during a professional appraisal for a commercial loan, the conspiracy becomes airtight. I slowly nodded. Every step they took deeper into the scheme strengthened the case against them. They're going to walk the appraiser through my house tomorrow, I said, almost in disbelief. Jonathan smirked. No. They're going to walk an independent financial witness through an active fraud scene. That distinction mattered. A lot. Jonathan opened another file on his screen. I've already prepared emergency filings for the court. Fraudulent transfer. Emergency injunction. Criminal referral package. The second the appraisal process officially begins, we move. You're coordinating with federal authorities already? I asked. I'm preparing to, he corrected carefully. Right now, this is still technically a civil matter with attached criminal exposure. But the moment loan fraud enters the equation, different universe. I leaned against the window, staring out across the skyline. Somewhere in Calabasas, Derek was probably pacing through my kitchen pretending to be a wealthy investor, while Megan ripped apart imported wallpaper and Devin fantasized about venture capital billions. None of them understood the scale of what they had triggered. Not even close. Jonathan broke the silence again. There's one more thing. His tone changed. Lower. Sharper. What now? I asked. The investigator found communication records between Devin and a private lender from Nevada. They've been negotiating aggressively for the last 72 hours. I frowned. That fast? Yes. And Audrey, the lender already requested proof of ownership documentation yesterday evening. My stomach tightened slightly. They sent the forged deed. They sent the forged deed, Jonathan confirmed. Along with screenshots from Devin's LLC registration and photographs of your property. I closed my eyes briefly. They had moved from fantasy into execution faster than I imagined. Jonathan continued. The lender responded this morning offering preliminary approval for a $300,000 bridge loan pending tomorrow's appraisal. $300,000. Almost exactly the amount Devin needed to survive the IRS. Everything fit perfectly now. The fake startup headquarters. The sudden urgency. The aggressive push to remove me from the house immediately. The live stream. The renovations. They weren't celebrating. They were staging collateral. They never cared about living there, I said quietly. No, Jonathan agreed. Your mansion was never the prize. He paused. It was the escape vehicle. A cold silence settled over the room. Then slowly, despite everything, I smiled. Because for the first time since Sunday dinner, I could finally see the entire board clearly. And they had just trapped themselves in every possible direction. If tomorrow's appraisal happens, I asked carefully, how bad does this become for them? Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Best case? Multiple felony fraud charges, civil liability, massive financial penalties, and prison exposure. He gave a thin, ruthless smile. Worst case? Federal conspiracy indictments. I looked back out over Los Angeles. Derek had wanted to feel powerful. Devin had wanted fast money. Megan wanted my life. Barbara wanted control. And all four of them had mistaken my silence for weakness. That was going to become the most expensive misunderstanding of their entire lives. Derek slowly lowered the stainless steel tongs as the arrogant smile disappeared from his face. The music was still blasting through the yard, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Even through the tinted windshield, I could see confusion spreading across their faces like cracks in ice. Then Derek noticed the police cars. His expression shifted instantly from annoyance to genuine panic. Megan removed her sunglasses. Devin quickly set his beer down. Barbara abruptly ended her phone call as she stared at the patrol vehicles parked behind Jonathan's black car. Jonathan calmly opened the driver's door and stepped out first. The two officers followed. Finally, I opened my own door. The warm California air hit my face as I stepped slowly out of the vehicle holding my leather briefcase. My heels clicked sharply against the stone driveway with cold precision. The entire party went silent. Derek took a step forward. "What the hell is this, Audrey?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply looked around at the destruction in front of me. My furniture scattered across the yard. Empty bottles. Tire marks across the lawn. Smoke from the grill rising in front of my windows. My home looked like a crime scene. Because it was one. Jonathan slowly opened the leather folder under his arm. "Derek Collins," he said calmly, "before you say another word, I strongly recommend that you listen carefully." Devin immediately tried to interrupt. "Hey, you can't just come in here like..." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, I advise you to remain silent." Devin's confidence cracked instantly. Derek looked nervously between the police officers and me. "Audrey, if this is about the credit cards, we can handle this like adults." "Like adults?" I asked softly. My voice was calm. Too calm. That frightened him more than yelling would have. I took a step closer. "Adults like when you forged my signature on an illegal property transfer? Or adults like when you submitted a fraudulent federal loan application using forged documents?" All the color drained from Derek's face. Completely. Megan let out a nervous laugh. "What is she even talking about?" Jonathan pulled several printed documents from his folder and held them up. "We're talking about a fraudulent quitclaim deed filed with the county Friday at 3:47 p.m. We're talking about wire fraud, document forgery, financial conspiracy, and federal mortgage fraud." The beer slipped from Devin's hand and shattered on the pavement. Barbara stepped toward Derek. "Don't say anything," she whispered urgently. "She's just trying to scare us." Jonathan smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Oh, Mrs. Collins, nobody is trying to scare you anymore. That part is over. Now we're at the consequences." One of the officers opened a folder. "Derek Collins?" Yes. "You have the right to remain silent." The entire world seemed to stop. Derek literally stepped backward. What? The officer continued reading his rights. Megan started talking over him. "This is ridiculous. The house belongs to us. Derek legally gave it to us." "No," I replied coldly, staring directly into her eyes. "Derek attempted to give away property he never owned." I slowly removed copies of the trust documents from my briefcase. "This mansion has belonged exclusively to my irrevocable trust since before our marriage. Legally, none of you ever had any claim to this property." Megan's confidence shattered instantly. Devin turned desperately toward Jonathan. "Look, I'm sure we can settle this civilly." Jonathan gave a short laugh. "The Securities and Exchange Commission will probably also want to discuss your Instagram live stream where you solicited investments using this property as a fraudulent business asset." Devin froze. Completely froze. "What live stream?" "The one we recorded in full." A cold satisfaction spread through me as I watched real fear finally appear on their faces. For the first time since that dinner, they understood the scale of what they had done. This wasn't a family argument. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was a federal criminal case. Barbara tried desperately to regain control. "Audrey, you're overreacting. We're family." I looked at her without emotion. Family doesn't steal houses. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't sell stolen furniture on Facebook Marketplace. One of the officers looked up. "Barbara Collins?" She swallowed hard. "Yes. We also need you to come with us for questioning regarding the sale of stolen property and grand theft." Her phone slipped from her hand onto the ground. Derek stared at me as if he barely recognized me anymore. "Audrey, please." "I didn't know." "Yes, you did." I opened my briefcase, pulled out the flash drive, and held it up slightly. "Because I have the full video of you sitting in my office forging my signature while your mother instructed you to do it." The silence afterward was absolute. Even the music had stopped. Derek looked unable to breathe. Jonathan handed the flash drive to one of the officers. "Backup copies have already been sent to the district attorney," he said calmly. The officer nodded, then looked directly at Derek. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the entire driveway. And in that exact moment, the imaginary empire they had built in 24 hours collapsed completely. When he saw the unmistakable black and white police cruisers parked directly behind us, a brief flash of confusion crossed his face. But true to his arrogant and unbelievably dense nature, that confusion quickly transformed into a smug, self-satisfied grin. He probably thought I had called the police to file some meaningless civil complaint, or worse, that he could use the officers to enforce his ridiculous 24-hour eviction notice and have me physically removed from the property. I pushed open the heavy car door and stepped onto the stone driveway. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Jonathan stepped out from the driver's side at the exact same moment, his leather briefcase firmly gripped in his right hand. The second I became fully visible, the music stopped abruptly. Devin had rushed over and yanked the auxiliary cord from the speaker. The sudden silence that fell over the front yard was deafening, broken only by the crackling sound of the charcoal grill. Barbara slowly lowered her cell phone. Her mouth parted slightly as she took in my navy-tailored suit and the unshakable expression on my face. Megan straightened in her chair. Her grip tightened around her champagne glass. But Derek didn't step back. He puffed out his chest completely, wildly misreading the tactical advantage I held. He tossed his grilling tongs onto the side table beside the barbecue, grabbed his half-empty beer bottle, and swaggered down the stone path toward me. He stopped about 10 feet away, looking me up and down with pure contempt written across his face. Then he glanced at the two police officers now stepping out of their cruisers behind me. Well, Derek called loudly, his voice echoing across the silent driveway. "I told you to be gone by 6, Audrey. Technically, you're trespassing right now." He took a long sip of beer, his eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Did you come back to beg, or are you just here to collect the rest of your trash?" I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I simply stared at him, letting his unbelievably stupid words hang in the air for everyone to hear. He was so desperate to look powerful in front of his mother and sister that he completely ignored the fact that I hadn't arrived alone. I had brought a high-powered attorney and armed law enforcement officers. "I didn't come back for my trash, Derek," I said. My voice was disturbingly calm, carrying perfectly through the distance between us. "I came back to take out the trash." Derek barked out a harsh mocking laugh, completely unfazed by my response. He turned toward Devin and Megan, gesturing toward me like I was some pathetic comedian performing for attention. He still thought this was a domestic argument over a house he magically believed he owned. He had absolutely no idea the trap had already closed. Before Derek could step any closer, Devin suddenly moved past him. Devin was significantly taller than Derek and constantly used his physical size to dominate rooms and intimidate investors who questioned his business ideas. He marched down the driveway, his expensive designer sneakers crushing the delicate jasmine petals I had carefully planted along the stone border. He stopped inches from me, deliberately invading my personal space in an attempt to make me back down. But I planted my feet firmly against the stone and looked directly into his eyes, refusing to give up even an inch of ground. I could smell the expensive cologne he was wearing, no doubt purchased with money that should have gone to the IRS. "You need to leave right now, Audrey," Devin ordered, his deep voice loaded with aggressive authority. "Derek was generous enough to give you 24 hours, but that time has officially expired. This is not your house anymore. You can't just show up here with some lawyer and try to scare us with empty threats." He spread his arms dramatically toward the mansion behind him. "I'm the CEO of a rapidly expanding tech company, and this property is now my corporate headquarters. If you don't turn around and get back in your little sedan, things are going to get very ugly for you." I didn't even blink. I simply tilted my head slightly and looked past his broad shoulders. The two police officers had finished securing the perimeter and were now calmly walking up the driveway with their hands resting casually near their dark uniforms. Devin noticed my gaze shift and finally turned his head to acknowledge the officers approaching behind us. Any normal person carrying massive federal tax debt and a history of failed companies would have panicked instantly at the sight of armed police officers entering the property. But Devin was so completely consumed by his own fabricated reality that he actually smiled. He genuinely believed the police were there to protect him. He believed the legal system was designed to protect his newly stolen wealth. "Officers, perfect timing," Devin shouted, raising his hand and waving at them as if he had personally called them to settle some minor neighborhood dispute. "I am the legal owner of this property. This woman is my brother-in-law's estranged wife. She is currently trespassing on private property and refusing to vacate the premises after receiving formal eviction notice. I want her removed immediately." To prove his point, Devin reached into the back pocket of his tailored shorts and pulled out a folded stack of papers. They were the formation documents for his newly created LLC, the exact corporate entity he was attempting to use to secure the fraudulent hard money loan. He aggressively unfolded the paperwork and shoved it directly toward the chest of the lead police officer. "Look right here," Devin insisted, stabbing his finger hard against the printed ink. "This is a legally binding corporate document. The quitclaim deed was filed with the county yesterday afternoon. The title was officially transferred to my company. I have the exclusive legal authority to decide who is allowed on this property, and I am formally requesting that you place this woman under arrest and escort her off my driveway. She is actively harassing my family." The lead officer, a tall man with gray streaks at his temples, did not take the papers. He didn't even look at them. He simply stared at Devin with an expression of deep amusement. The kind of look an experienced detective gives a reckless criminal who just handed over the murder weapon. The second officer remained silent several feet away, subtly shifting his weight while exchanging a knowing glance with his partner. They had already been fully briefed by the district attorney. They had already watched the high-definition footage of the forgery that took place inside my home office. They knew exactly who Devin was, and they knew the papers in his hand were nothing more than a signed confession to a federal crime. "Sir, I strongly suggest you lower your voice and step back," the lead officer said calmly, though his tone carried unmistakable authority. He didn't reach for handcuffs. He didn't ask for my identification. He didn't question my presence. Instead, he simply crossed his arms and looked directly at Devin. "We are not here to arrest this woman for trespassing." Devin looked genuinely confused. His polished tech CEO persona slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked and heavily indebted amateur underneath. "What do you mean you're not arresting her?" he snapped. "I just showed you the corporate documentation. I own this house." The officer let out a short, humorless laugh and shook his head. Then he deliberately stepped aside, clearing a direct line of sight between Devin and Jonathan. "You don't own anything, son," the officer replied quietly. He gestured toward my attorney, who stood silently beside me holding his leather briefcase. We're going to let Mr. Jonathan explain the exact reality of your current situation. And I strongly recommend you listen very carefully to every word he says, because your next move is going to determine how the rest of your night goes." Devin slowly lowered the wrinkled corporate paperwork. His eyes moved nervously between the armed officers and Jonathan. The aggressive, dominant posture he had used moments earlier to intimidate me vanished completely. Derek, who had been watching the entire exchange from several feet away, suddenly went pale. The smug smile finally disappeared from his face. The obnoxious barbecue music was gone. The fake victory celebration was over. The stage was perfectly set for Jonathan to open his briefcase and deliver the legal execution. Jonathan didn't even acknowledge Devin's frustrated silence. Instead, he calmly stepped forward, brushing past the towering tech executive as though he were completely insignificant. Jonathan unclasped his heavy leather briefcase and laid it flat across the hood of Devin's rental car. The metallic click of the lock snapping open sounded shockingly loud in the silent driveway. Several of my wealthy Calabasas neighbors, drawn outside by the sudden police arrival and abrupt end of the hip-hop music, were now standing at the edges of their perfectly maintained lawns. They watched the entire scene unfold with open curiosity, eager to see how the neighborhood spectacle would end. Jonathan reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound in a dark blue cover. Then he turned away from Devin and walked directly toward my husband. Derek instinctively took half a step backward, his eyes flickering nervously toward the police officers watching his every movement. Jonathan stopped directly in front of him and practically shoved the heavy packet into Derek's chest. Derek had no choice but to take it. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the dense legal text. "Let's clear up this little real estate fantasy right now," Jonathan announced. His voice was loud, perfectly projected so every neighbor, police officer, and family member standing on the lawn could hear every single word clearly. "Ori," he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "Wasn't this house mine? We're married." I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Not even satisfaction. Only clarity. For 5 years, Derek had mistaken access for ownership. He believed sleeping in luxury made him powerful. He believed wearing expensive watches purchased with my money made him successful. He believed marriage entitled him to assets he never built, never earned, and never legally possessed. And now, standing barefoot on the ruins of his own arrogance, he was finally confronting reality for the very first time. "No, Derek," I said calmly. "It was never yours." The words hit him harder than any scream ever could. I watched his knees almost buckle beneath him. "You lived here because I allowed it. You used my accounts because I trusted you. You stood beside me and enjoyed a life you did absolutely nothing to create." I gestured toward the mansion behind him. "But this house? This life? This power? None of it belonged to you." Behind Derek, Barbara suddenly stepped forward in a panic. "This is ridiculous," she snapped shrilly, her composure finally breaking. "You can't do this to family. Derek is your husband." Jonathan immediately turned toward her. "Oh, she can," he replied coldly. "And after tonight, she'll also be the primary victim in a multi-defendant federal fraud investigation." Barbara's face went white. Devin finally found his voice again. "This is intimidation," he barked, though the confidence was gone now. "You're bluffing. Nobody's going to prison over paperwork." One of the officers actually laughed. "Paperwork," the older officer repeated. "Son, you submitted fraudulent collateral to a lender across state lines while soliciting investors online using property you didn't own. That's not paperwork. That's felony fraud." Megan slowly lowered her champagne glass onto the patio table with visibly shaking hands. The reality of the situation was finally spreading through the family like poison. Jonathan opened his briefcase once more and removed a thin silver flash drive. Since everyone is present, he announced smoothly, "I think now is the appropriate time to discuss the security footage." Derek's head snapped upward. Barbara froze completely. And for the first time all evening, genuine terror entered Devon's eyes. Jonathan held up the flash drive between two fingers. "We have high-definition video footage of Derek illegally accessing Audrey's private device, forging her digital signature, and filing the fraudulent quitclaim deed while Barbara coached him through the process." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the neighboring spectators standing near their driveways stopped whispering. Derek's face lost all remaining color. Barbara staggered backward slightly, grabbing the edge of the patio chair for balance. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's extremely possible," I replied. "Because unlike all of you, I actually invest in security." Jonathan handed the flash drive directly to the lead officer. The officer nodded once after taking it. "That's enough for probable cause," he said firmly. Then he looked directly at Derek. "Sir, place your hands where I can see them." Derek recoiled instinctively. Wait a second," he stammered, looking desperately between me, Jonathan, and the officers. "Audrey, please. You can stop this. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated quietly. I took one slow step closer to him. "You forged legal documents." Another step. "You tried to steal a multi-million-dollar property." Another. "You allowed your family to destroy my home, sell my belongings, and use my assets to commit federal financial fraud." I stopped directly in front of him. "And now you want mercy because you finally understand there are consequences." Tears began forming in Derek's eyes. But it was too late for tears. The older officer moved behind him smoothly. "Turn around, sir." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the driveway. Barbara gasped loudly. Megan burst into tears immediately. Devon took a sudden step backward toward the house before the second officer sharply ordered him to stop moving. "No," Devon said rapidly, panic exploding into his voice. "No, no, no. This is insane. We didn't steal anything. Derek transferred the property voluntarily." "You mean the property he never owned?" Jonathan asked. Devon said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The entire scheme had collapsed. The fake startup headquarters, the fraudulent loan application, the investor livestream, the forged deed, the destruction of property, the online furniture sales. Every single piece had become evidence. Derek looked at me one last time as the officer guided him toward the patrol car. His face was destroyed now, not physically, but psychologically. The arrogance was gone forever. The ego, the superiority, the entitlement, all stripped away in under 10 minutes. "Audrey," he whispered weakly. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left between us worth saving. Jonathan closed his briefcase with a calm click and looked toward the mansion. "Well," he said smoothly, "shall we reclaim your property?" I looked past the police lights reflecting across the marble entrance of my home. The smoke from Devon's cheap barbecue still drifted through the air. Broken champagne bottles littered my front steps. The walls inside were damaged. My furniture had been moved. My home had been violated. But none of that mattered now, because the people responsible were finally being removed from it. "Yes," I said calmly. Then I walked past all of them, straight through the front doors of my house, like the rightful owner returning to claim what had always been hers. I looked toward the wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway. At least 20 wealthy neighbors had gathered along the curb by now. They were the same corporate executives and socialites Barbara had spent years desperately trying to impress during her visits to my home. Now every single one of them stood silently beneath the California sunset, holding their smartphones high and recording the complete public collapse of her family in high definition. Barbara saw them too. And the instant she realized the entire neighborhood was watching, something inside her finally shattered. A strangled sound escaped her throat. Not rage anymore. Not arrogance. Humiliation. Pure, catastrophic humiliation. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she sagged against the side of Devon's rented car, breathing hard while mascara streamed down her face in black lines. The performance was over. The audience had seen everything. Jonathan calmly adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit and glanced toward the officers. I believe Mrs. Barbara also admitted on audio recording to knowingly selling stolen property through an online marketplace, he said smoothly, including designer furniture and imported antiques valued well above the felony threshold. Barbara's head snapped upward. No. The lead officer cut her off immediately. Ma'am, at this point I strongly advise you to stop talking. But Barbara had lost all ability to control herself. She deserved it. Barbara screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. She thought she was better than us. She treated Derek like a servant while she flaunted her money in front of everyone. I tilted my head slightly. No, Barbara, I replied calmly. I treated Derek like a husband. He treated me like an ATM. The neighbors murmured quietly among themselves. Devon suddenly stepped forward again, desperation replacing every trace of swagger. Okay, he said rapidly, raising both hands. Everybody needs to calm down. We can fix this. The loan hasn't gone through yet. Nobody actually lost money. Jonathan looked at him almost sympathetically. That's not how federal fraud works, he answered. Devon's face tightened. Jonathan continued mercilessly. You submitted forged collateral to obtain financing across state lines. You solicited investors using fraudulent representations of ownership. You publicly advertised assets that did not belong to you. The fact that the money hasn't cleared yet doesn't erase the conspiracy. The word conspiracy landed like a hammer. Megan burst into tears again. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered weakly. I finally looked at her directly. No, I said. What you expected was for me to stay quiet. Silence. Because it was true. Every single one of them had built their plan around one assumption, that I would be emotional, embarrassed, overwhelmed, and too broken to fight back effectively. Instead, I documented everything. I gathered evidence. I waited. And now the consequences were unfolding exactly as they deserved. The second officer turned toward Devon. Sir, place your hands behind your back. Devon immediately backed away. You can't arrest me, he snapped. I didn't forge anything. You participated in the fraud, the officer replied flatly. And you filed the loan application. Devon looked wildly toward Jonathan. You're a lawyer, he said desperately. You know this won't stick. Jonathan gave him a cold smile. I know exactly how well it's going to stick. The officer grabbed Devon's wrist and pulled his arms behind his back. The metallic snap of the handcuffs echoed across the driveway a second time. Megan let out a sob so loud several neighbors visibly flinched. Derek lifted his head weakly from the patrol car and stared in horror as his beloved brother-in-law was arrested beside him. The fantasy was completely dead now. No startup empire. No investor money. No mansion headquarters. Only police lights, criminal charges, and the full public exposure of their greed. Barbara suddenly began crying again, but softer this time. Broken. Defeated. She looked at me with swollen eyes full of hatred and disbelief. How could you do this to family? She whispered. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. You stopped being family the moment you decided to steal from me. The lead officer began escorting Derek toward the patrol vehicle. Derek twisted slightly, looking back at me one final time. Audrey, please. His voice cracked completely. I remembered the dinner table, the eviction notice, the smug smile, the champagne celebration on my lawn, the destruction inside my home. And I felt absolutely nothing. No love survives betrayal that deliberate. The patrol car door opened. Derek hesitated for half a second before the officer guided him inside. Then the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the neighborhood like the final line of a verdict. Jonathan exhaled slowly beside me. Well, he said quietly, that concludes the hostile takeover. For the first time all evening, a small genuine smile touched my face. Not because they were suffering, but because I was finally free. Free from Derek's entitlement. Free from Barbara's manipulation. Free from their endless greed, chaos, and resentment. The mansion behind me was damaged, but my life no longer was. I picked up my leather briefcase and walked calmly toward the front entrance of my house while police lights flashed red and blue across the marble walls. And behind me, the empire they tried to steal collapsed completely under the weight of its own stupidity. They're legally obligated to report major wire fraud cases to federal authorities. Devon's face completely collapsed. The arrogant tech CEO persona shattered instantly, revealing the terrified and deeply indebted fraud hiding underneath. Sweat rolled visibly down his forehead as he stared at me in absolute disbelief. "You ruined us," he whispered weakly. "No," I corrected coldly. "You ruined yourselves the moment you decided stealing my property was easier than paying your taxes." Jonathan calmly opened another folder from his leather briefcase. The crisp sound of paper sliding free echoed across the silent driveway. "And unfortunately for you," he said smoothly, "the situation gets even worse." Every eye turned toward him immediately. Jonathan held up a printed document stamped with official federal markings. "About 12 minutes ago," he continued, "the Nevada lender forwarded the fraudulent loan application package to federal investigators. Because the application crossed state lines and involved forged property documentation exceeding $2 million in collateral value, the case automatically triggered federal fraud review protocols." Megan's knees visibly buckled. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Jonathan replied mercilessly. "The FBI has already been notified." The words landed like a bomb in the middle of the driveway. Even the gathered neighbors went completely silent. Several of them lowered their phones slightly, stunned by the escalation. Devon stumbled backward into the barbecue grill, nearly knocking it over. "This is insane," he snapped desperately. "People make business mistakes all the time. This is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jonathan repeated with sharp amusement. "You forged ownership records, attempted to secure interstate commercial financing under false pretenses, concealed a six-figure federal tax lien, transferred stolen funds to expedite fraudulent lending, and attempted to seize control of a trust-owned property through coercion and electronic fraud." Jonathan took one deliberate step closer. "That is not a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "That is organized financial crime." Devon looked around wildly for support, but nobody moved. Not Megan. Not Barbara. Not Derek sobbing in the patrol car. For the first time all evening, he realized he was completely alone. The lead officer finally stepped forward again. "Devon," he announced firmly, "place your hands behind your back." Devon froze. "You're under investigation for suspected mortgage fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and submission of falsified financial documentation." "You can't arrest me," Devon barked suddenly, panic flooding his voice. "I didn't forge anything." Derek signed the papers. The officer's expression didn't change. "And you knowingly used those forged papers to apply for a fraudulent commercial loan," he replied. "That makes you part of the conspiracy." Devon looked like he might run. His eyes darted toward the open side gate beside the garage. The second officer noticed immediately and rested a hand on his taser. "Don't," he warned sharply. The driveway fell dead silent again. Then, slowly, Devin raised his trembling hands. The metallic snap of another pair of handcuffs echoed through the evening air. Megan broke down completely. She collapsed onto the stone driveway, crying hysterically as the officers secured her husband beside the patrol car. Barbara started sobbing again, though this time the rage had disappeared. All that remained was terror. And Derek, still pressed against the backseat divider inside the patrol vehicle, stared out the window at me with hollow, shattered eyes. He finally understood everything. The mansion, the money, the luxury, the status. None of it had ever belonged to him. And now, because of his greed, he had lost the only real thing he actually possessed, his freedom. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my patience was submission. What they never understood was that restraint is not the absence of power. Sometimes it is simply power waiting for the correct moment to strike. I stood alone in my restored dining room, running my fingers lightly across the polished walnut table they had nearly destroyed. The house no longer carried their noise, their entitlement, or their chaos. The air itself felt lighter, cleaner. Jonathan had finalized the last stage of the divorce proceedings 3 days earlier. Because of the overwhelming evidence of fraud, criminal conspiracy, and financial misconduct, the court granted nearly every motion we filed without resistance. Derek walked away with nothing except his criminal record and a mountain of legal debt he would likely spend decades trying to escape. The judge was particularly unimpressed by the forged quitclaim deed and the attempted fraudulent loan application. According to Jonathan, the courtroom went completely silent when the prosecution displayed the 4K security footage of Derek electronically signing my name while Barbara coached him from behind his shoulder. One reckless decision had destroyed an entire family. Not because I ruined them. Because they believed greed made them untouchable. Outside my windows, the California evening sun cast golden light across the restored garden beds Barbara had trampled during her breakdown. The landscapers had repaired everything perfectly. Fresh white jasmine bloomed again along the stone walkway, as if the house itself had erased every trace of them. And in many ways, it had. The neighbors eventually stopped gossiping because there was nothing left to discuss. The scandal burned hot for 2 weeks, then faded into another wealthy Calabasas cautionary tale whispered over wine glasses and country club lunches. Don't try to steal from the wrong woman. I walked slowly through the quiet halls of my mansion, passing the office where Derek had destroyed his own future with a single tap on an iPad screen. The room looked untouched now. Calm. Professional. Almost sacred. I paused beside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely nothing when I thought about Derek. No anger. No heartbreak. No grief. Only clarity. He never truly loved me. He loved access to my life. My wealth. My stability, my success. And when he believed he could seize those things without me, he tried. That was his final mistake. My phone vibrated softly against the marble kitchen island. A message from Jonathan appeared on the screen. Federal investigators officially expanded the case this morning. Devin is negotiating. Megan may cooperate too. Looks like everyone is starting to turn on each other. I stared at the message for a moment before locking the screen again. Of course, they were turning on each other. People held together by greed always collapse the moment survival becomes more important than loyalty. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and walked out toward the terrace overlooking the infinity pool. The water shimmered peacefully beneath the fading sunset. A month ago, they stood on this property celebrating what they thought was victory. Now Derek was awaiting sentencing. Devin was under federal investigation. Megan was drowning in debt. Barbara had become a social outcast. And I was still here. Still standing. Still wealthy. Still free. Because in the end, they misunderstood one critical thing about me. I was never the victim in their story. I was the consequence. I took the freshly liquidated capital from my trust and purchased a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the entire skyline. The building had private security, biometric elevator access, underground parking, and a concierge staff that treated privacy like a religion. No manicured suburban lawns. No fake country club smiles. No neighbors peeking through curtains hoping for gossip. Just steel, glass, silence, and control. The penthouse felt completely different from the mansion in Calabasas. That house had been built around appearances, sprawling dining rooms, oversized guest suites, spaces designed for entertaining people I no longer respected. This place was designed entirely for power. My office occupied the entire eastern side of the penthouse. Black marble floors. Custom walnut shelving. A trading wall filled with live financial data streaming across 6 mounted monitors. Every inch of the space reflected precision and intention. For the first time in years, every object around me existed because I chose it, not because it fit the expectations of a husband, a family, or a social image. 3 weeks after moving in, Jonathan stopped by with finalized court documents. The divorce was officially complete. No settlement. No alimony. No asset division. Derek walked away with nothing. Actually, less than nothing. Because between the criminal defense fees, IRS investigations tied to the conspiracy, and civil liability claims connected to the property fraud, he would likely spend the next decade buried under debt he could never realistically repay. Jonathan placed the final folder neatly on my kitchen island and loosened his tie slightly. "You know," he said casually, "most people would have settled quietly." I looked up from my espresso machine. "Most people," I replied, "don't try to steal a trust-owned estate and commit federal mortgage fraud in the process." Jonathan laughed softly. "No," he admitted. "Most people definitely don't." He walked toward the glass windows overlooking downtown traffic thousands of feet below. The city glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Helicopters drifted between skyscrapers in the distance, while endless rivers of headlights moved through the streets below like streams of light. "You ever regret it?" he asked after a moment. "The marriage? The destruction?" I considered the question carefully. In another life, a weaker version of myself, maybe I would have felt guilt. Maybe I would have mourned the collapse of the family I tried so hard to preserve. But guilt only exists when innocence is destroyed unfairly. That wasn't what happened here. They made decisions. Calculated ones. Greedy ones. And consequences arrived exactly where they belonged. "No," I answered honestly. "I regret ignoring the warning signs for so long." Jonathan nodded once, as if that was the only answer he expected. A few months later, the federal indictments became public. Debon was formally charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted mortgage fraud, and financial misrepresentation tied to the falsified collateral application. Megan accepted a cooperation agreement to avoid harsher penalties and reportedly testified that the entire scheme had been planned weeks in advance. Barbara's social downfall became permanent. She moved quietly out of California after the remaining members of her social circle stopped acknowledging her completely. And Derek, the man who once stood in my kitchen believing he owned my future, eventually accepted a plea deal. Jonathan forwarded me the sentencing summary late one evening. I read exactly 2 lines before closing the file. I didn't care anymore. That surprised me more than anything. For months I thought victory would feel explosive, dramatic, satisfying. Instead, true victory felt quiet. It looked like waking up peacefully in a home nobody could weaponize against me. It sounded like silence without manipulation. It felt like freedom from people who mistook kindness for weakness. One rainy evening, I stood alone on the penthouse terrace holding a glass of wine while thunder rolled across downtown Los Angeles. Reflections from the skyline shimmered across the wet glass towers surrounding me. My phone buzzed once with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. The message contained only 3 words. "I'm sorry, Audrey." No explanation. No defense. No request for forgiveness. Just the final broken remains of a man who had destroyed himself trying to steal a life he never earned. I stared at the message for a few seconds before calmly blocking the number forever. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket, turned toward the glowing skyline, and smiled faintly to myself. Because Derek had been wrong about one final thing. He thought losing him would destroy me. But in reality, losing him was the most profitable investment decision I had ever made. It's a breathtaking architectural masterpiece suspended above the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlook the glittering lights of downtown Los Angeles. A private elevator requires biometric fingerprint authentication to operate, and there are absolutely no guest bedrooms anywhere in the penthouse. It is a sleek, impenetrable fortress designed entirely for my peace of mind. No space for uninvited relatives. No backyard for tacky barbecue parties. No unauthorized access. Just silence, security, and complete control. My personal victory translated directly into my professional life. The surgical precision I used to dismantle Derek and his family never distracted me from my career. If anything, the adrenaline of the legal war sharpened my corporate instincts to an entirely new level. Over the next 6 months, I aggressively negotiated 3 massive back-to-back corporate mergers, generating record-breaking revenue for my firm. The senior board members recognized the absolute ruthlessness of my execution and officially elevated me to full equity partner. Now I sit permanently at the highest table in the company, commanding a massive corner office overlooking the very same city I conquered completely. And if there is one critical lesson buried inside my entire ordeal, let it be this. Never allow the idea of family to become a free pass for financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or blatant disrespect. A marriage certificate does not automatically entitle an insecure partner to the wealth you sacrificed years to build. A shared last name does not give toxic relatives the right to invade your sanctuary and demand access to your resources. Protect your assets aggressively and unapologetically. Establish boundaries that are absolute and enforce them without hesitation. If you possess significant wealth, hire a ruthless attorney. Create an irrevocable trust. Draft an airtight prenuptial agreement. Never allow temporary romance to blind you to the very real danger of human greed. Entitled people will smile directly to your face while quietly planning how to dismantle your life, fully convinced they deserve your success simply because they exist near it. When people show you exactly who they are and what they want from you, believe them the first time. Do not negotiate endlessly with emotionally manipulative people. Do not bankrupt yourself trying to purchase loyalty from those who never respected you to begin with. Remove toxic individuals from your life before they destroy your peace entirely. I learned that lesson standing in the ruins of a marriage I once thought was permanent. But I also learned something far more important afterward. Peace is not found in winning battles. Peace is found in building a life nobody can invade ever again. So now, every morning, I wake up above the Los Angeles skyline with complete silence surrounding me. No screaming. No manipulation. No entitlement. Only clarity. Only freedom. Only the future I built for myself. And honestly, that is worth far more than the mansion ever was.